Welcome to the Shine the Way podcast. Tonight I'm joined by Chad Parks. He is a teacher, a coach, minister, keynote speaker, author, and podcast host. Coach Parks is currently the Shawnee Heights wrestling head coach. He's been that way since 2005. He was a teacher at Shawnee Heights. He left that in 2023 to work for FCA and follow some other paths. He's currently also the Washburn University football leadership coach. He is a mindset coach at Winning Mindset. He's the host of the Perspective podcast with Coach P, author of Amazon's #1 best-selling book, Game Changing Moves. He's been the Kansas Class 5A Wrestling Coach of the Year. Multiple times he's won the Regional League, City, County Coach of the Year award. He's a college All-American wrestler, 4-time college team captain, College Male Athlete of the Year. He's married to Lori and has 4 kids. And I just found out, unfortunately, he had to deal with Cody Parks in college too. So welcome, Coach.
Yeah. Hey, thank you, Jacob. I appreciate it.
All right. Obviously, wrestling is big in your background, so we'll get into that a lot. But let's start back to young Chad Parks. Growing up, where did you grow up and what sports did you play?
Yeah, I'm from Pawhuska, Oklahoma. So my dad was a longtime wrestling and football coach down there. Started wrestling like a walk. And so I spent a lot of time in the wrestling mats, a lot of time in the football locker room. And then wrestling, football, baseball, those were my 3 main sports the majority of my life. I ran a little bit of track, but I would say football and wrestling are my 2 greatest passions.
So your dad coached you, and that's one of the common things I've found with a lot of people that coaches. They've had a parent coach, and not just on the weekends on a soccer field in 3-on-3 soccer or something, like legitimately coach them at a high level.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like when you look back as a youth, before you even got to the high school and went on? But when you look back at the youth ranks and coaching by your dad, how'd that go for you?
It was good. I think it felt pretty awesome when I was young, just following him around. And like I said, getting to, sitting there with the high school football coaches and watching film and going to wrestling camps and, as a ball boy for the football team, getting to do all those things. That was really fun. We worked hard like a lot of teachers and coaches, in the summertime we were painting houses and cutting grass and doing all those things. My dad was big into lifting, bodybuilding for a while. And so from a young age, I was in the weight room and I would just follow him around with some dumbbells, and whatever he did, I would do those. So it was good for him to just basically kind of set the example. Hey, here's what sports looks like, and I just got to watch that. So I got to see him coach, but for me, I was just excited about sports all the time.
So in high school, did you continue focusing solely on, not solely, but was wrestling clearly your sport, or did you have another passion, but you're just really good at wrestling, or how did that come about?
Yeah, I would say, like a lot of people, growing up, it was like during baseball season, that was my favorite sport. During football was my favorite sport. And, but I would say by my sophomore year in high school, I knew like, I want to go wrestle in college. This is what I want to do. This is something I'm really good at. It's kind of my thing. I'm not very tall, so that limits limits some of the stuff you can do. If you were to like draw a picture of like what a wrestler looks like, and that's probably what I look like, And so, had I been 6 foot tall, football may have been something, because I loved it, but I just kind of knew with my stature and ability that wrestling was something I wanted to pursue, and thankfully those doors opened.
So other than your dad, was there any coach or coaches that stood out as somebody that, when you look back now, really had a profound impact on not only your ability to perform in a sport, but also maybe even outside the sport, or now that you look back, that you take things from as a coach yourself?
Yeah, I was blessed with. So my dad's in the National Hall of Fame for coaching. He's in the Oklahoma branch of the National Hall of Fame. So I had him. Coach Winton, he was like my private coach growing up, technique coach. Coach Winton had a background in judo as well. Was a real good wrestler, background in judo. So got to do a lot with Coach Winton. And again, that was just kind of behind the scenes, summertime, Coach Winton and I in there working out. So a lot of my love and passion for technique, and my dad was a great technician, but I think a lot of the love and passion for technique came from him. And then Coach Atterbury, our high school football coach. Coach Atterbury had a son that was a few years older than me that I really looked up to. And then he had his son, that was 1 year younger than me. That was my workout partner. And I love Coach Adbury. He's one of those just old school, like hard nosed, water makes you weak coaches, But
Hmm.
yeah, for me, it was like I knew he cared and loved me. He loved me, but he pushed me so hard. He also had coached his sons, so I think he knew the pressure of being a coach's kid, and so it's like he would sort of protect me from that sometimes. So Coach Adbury was a big one, and then Coach Thompson, my college coach. This was at Labette, but phenomenal. One of the best coaches that I've ever been around. I have stolen and continue to steal a lot of the things that Coach Thompson did that were so effective with not only myself but a lot of my teammates. That they apply on the wrestling match, but they apply in life as well.
So you were a 4-time college team captain. One of the things that happens a lot of times, or at least you hear about, is kids that are the best at their high school, they go to college and it's kind of a shock. Did you encounter any of that where you had to take a step back and be like, all right, this is a different level, even though maybe it's not Penn State, which is the wrestling kingdom right now, from what I
Yeah.
hear. But just that jump from any high school level to a college level, it seems like there's a pretty big gap in any sport. Did you encounter some of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I wrestled for Missouri Valley as a freshman, and we won a national title. At that time, Mobile was like the NAIA powerhouse. And, I walked in. You really don't know when you're a freshman. You just don't know. Yeah, I just remember we came in preseason, I'm lifting, I'm running. And I've always kind of been this way, but I just looked and said, okay, these guys are the All Americans and the national champions. Whatever they do, I'm going to do. So those are the guys I ran with. Those are the guys I lifted with. I was probably just this annoying freshman that was just always like doing what they were doing. And, I remember the first times that we were actually wrestling, a lot of the freshmen were together and I was jumping with those guys. And you realize pretty quick when you're wrestling, a junior who's got his man muscles and he's a national champion, there's levels to this thing. And so, yeah, so I took my fair share of whoopings that first year. The cool thing is, and I got better throughout the year, I didn't realize how much better I had gotten. So I ended up making varsity there, but got a medical red shirt. And when I transferred to Labette, and I remember walking in or wrestling, and Labette at that time was a perennial top 5 JUCO in the nation. A lot of studs. I mean, just state champions littered throughout the team. But I remember just walking in and wrestling guys and being surprised myself at how much better I'd gotten, throwing myself into the fire that first year and wrestling with those guys that were much more elite than I was. It was kind of like you get broken or you get better. And I probably got some of both, at some point throughout that season. But yeah, definitely made me better. And I think, I would equate it to, when somebody's in middle school and they get into high school and maybe they get thrown in varsity as a freshman or as a sophomore. Sometimes everything can just feel so fast. It was kind of the same thing. I remember, in college you have a 7-minute match. And so in high school, it's the periods are 2-2-2. So 6-minute match. It's 3-2-2 in college. 1 minute doesn't sound like a lot, but it is. I remember wrestling a college match and looking over at the clock and there was still like a minute 50 left. And I'm like, oh God, I feel like it's a third period right now, So yeah, so there was definitely an adjustment period. But at the same time, it's one of the things that I love looking back on it because you have to like really learn to appreciate the process.
So do you think being a 4-time captain is pretty unusual for anybody in any sport? Does your background, the fact that you had not those two coaches, your dad and excuse me, I forgot the other guy's name, but the one that kind of buffered you but worked with you, but those
Yeah,
two
Chad
that
Bray.
that they really put in the time with you. Did that help you be comfortable stepping into that leadership role as a team captain early?
Yeah, I did. I would say as far as work ethic goes, there was nothing I encountered going into college that um, was more difficult than things I had already done. So it was a lifestyle of working hard. Like I said, I mean, we would lift weights first thing in the morning, and then I had 35 yards I mowed when I was a senior in high school. So I would mow yards and then leave and go paint with my dad till dark. Unless I had practice, and that was my break, was going to practice. My dad trained us really hard. Coach Atterbury. I had several coaches that trained us really hard. So when I very first was competing as a college athlete, the level of the room was different. Like everybody in there is super good, so that you got there's some adjustment. But for me, the work wasn't like overwhelming. For a lot of people, they've never trained that hard, and I think that broke or ran off some people. So I think that definitely helped. And then there's probably a natural, I don't know, proclivity or translation of being a coach's kid and just being around that leadership all the time, even though you don't realize you're picking it up, that probably helped me to be able to move into those roles.
And just one last question here on the wrestling from high school to college. Are there things that you were doing in the high school arena when you were wrestling and winning that you realized, okay, I'm going to have to change this technique, or maybe I can't do that move no longer because they all know how to stop it. So we got to adjust. Was there was there a lot of technique changes that you had to do?
Yeah, I mean, the technique I had, I would say a lot of it worked, right away. But I can specifically think of, I've always been really quick, and on bottom, I could just explode to my feet, and I was up and out like my entire life. And then all of a sudden, whenever I got to college, I remember being in the room and being on bottom and trying to do a stand up, just explode to my feet, and a guy is like a grown man just threw me back down. So I learned pretty quick, like, man, I have to figure out a different way to get off bottom, right? So quad pods and tripods, those are things that you see a lot if you watch college wrestling. They work at every level. But yeah, so I definitely had to make that adjustment there. One other adjustment, that what I was doing wasn't necessarily not working, but I was 126 and 134 pounder my first year of college. And those were the weight classes then. Just all of a sudden got that freshman jump, but it wasn't like some freshmen do when they're partying. It was a freshman jump of like muscle. Just all of a sudden, had a growth spurt, and I was lifting really hard, and I packed on a lot of muscle. So when I transferred to Labette, coach thought he was recruiting a 134 pounder, and I walked in, I weighed 160 with single digit body fat. And he was like, "Oh, I don't think you're going to be at 34." I was like, "No." So I ended up wrestling 42 that year, and then 49, and then wrestled 49 the next year. So, it was one of those things where jumping weight classes, I was able to modify a little bit, or had to modify. But my coach pointed this out. I remember I wrestled a match and I won, and I walked off the mat, and he said, "Hey, what weight class are you at?" And I was 149. And he was like, "Oh, okay, okay. So you're not like a real little guy anymore." And I was like, "No." And he said, "Well, when you are in practice, you're really physical and you use your strength well. In a match, you're still trying to just use like nothing but speed. Why don't you use your physicality?" And I was like, "Oh, I never thought about it." It was like somebody had to give me permission, And so, yeah, as you move up in sizes, there's style differentials, But so those were a couple of adjustments that I had to make within those first couple of years.
So you become an All-American, and then obviously like all sports, it ends, and you jump into coaching. Why do you coach?
Well, I think my initial reason, because I kind of had a battle, like, do I want to go into ministry? And when I say ministry, like pastoral ministry, or do I want to go into teaching and coaching? Prayed about it, thought about it, and it's one of those things where I felt like I could look back and just see like the impact that my dad made. So the area that we grew up, there's a lot of poverty. And, my dad was one of those guys that behind the scenes, he would see a kid in school that needed tennis shoes, and he would buy them shoes. He would, nobody else even knew. My dad would just buy that kid shoes. He would buy him a coat. We would have several days per week people at our house, and we didn't have any money, but we'd have people at our house eating dinner with us, things like that. So I saw the impact my dad made, and I knew I wanted to make that same impact. And what better ministry could I ask for than to get to do that, right? And then, thinking about the other coaches that impacted me. So I think those were the initial reasons why I coached. Um, I also want to connect with this. One of my favorite definitions, or I guess it would be my favorite definition of a coach, is a person who takes someone from where they currently are to where they want or need to go. Where they want to go would be like their goals or their desired outcomes. Where they need to go, that's that place that you need a coach to help you get there. And sometimes it's like your potential is limited because you can't see the ceiling, right? Or you think you have a ceiling, but a coach is like, no, 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 your ceiling is over here. Okay. And so they're going to help you. I love getting to do that, man. I love getting to pour into athletes, to help them develop in every area of life. But more than anything, it's like encouraging and believing in them until they believe in themselves, and you can see them jump levels. Like it's one of the greatest feelings in the world.
With that definition, as coaches, we can see the ability kids have. And sometimes, like you say, they don't see that they can get to here. We see that they can get all the way up to here. They think I can get to here and that's good enough. And as a coach, you're failing them if you let them get to here and just settle. How do you how do you go about helping them realize that without coming across as, some kids today just you're hard, you're too hard on me, you're mean, like you're a bully, like all these things they can think when all you're really trying to do is what's best for them and see that, hey, here's where we need to get. How do you go about kind of managing that process?
Yeah, it's a great question because that is, it's an art and a science, right? And so I would say part of that, well, the beginning of that is building relationships. Rules without relationships lead to rebellion. So you have to build that relationship. And I think that goes in any area of life. If I can build that relationship, I mean, think about the coaches that impacted you the most. Like you would probably still run through a wall for them today, right? And most of those coaches cared about you, loved you, but also held you to high standards. And so for me, I think it's building that relationship. The standard is the standard. So we have high standards. Love, love is a huge thing, right? And love is not cotton candy. It's not soft. Sometimes it's an arm around the shoulder. Sometimes it is a listening ear, and sometimes it's a swift kick in the rear end. You're right, and not literally, but figuratively of "let's go." Right? You have more in the tank, and so, but you can do that more when you've built that relationship with them. And so, I think that's a big thing. In our room, I would say the years when I used to coach football and then coaching wrestling, take those things I just said, but also just add encouragement and add belief. I love the word encouragement because it means, and this is the way we can think about this as sports, literally to fill them with courage, right? I want to stand in your corner. I want to be in your corner. I want to be that courage until you are filled up and you have courage on your own. Or the same thing with belief. And it's amazing what a little belief can do to a heart and a mind, or what a little encouragement can do. One of my favorite coaches, Jim Miller, won 10 national championships at Wartburg. He said with his coaching staff, they would just say that they would throw darts of positivity. And so essentially what they would mean is catch people doing things right. You're going to get more of what you praise. So they would catch people doing things right and encourage those things and call those things out. Also, little things. If, and it may not be a big deal to you as a coach, but if you're walking around and just a hand on the shoulder, like, hey, I saw that right there. That was awesome, man. I love that was a great double leg. Or, dude, your intensity today is excellent. Little things like that, you could just say in passing. That kid might go home and be like, oh man, that was awesome. Like, coach was pumping me up today, right? And it can impact their mind, it can impact their heart, and it just takes us a second to do it. But I think it's doing those things intentionally, having your staff do those things intentionally. Which I'm blessed. I have a phenomenal coaching staff that just embraces that.
So with that, how do you and your coaching staff on your bad days set that aside and essentially show them, hey, for this next 2 hours or hour and a half, whatever we have for practice, like I've got stuff going on in my personal life. I've got stuff going on outside of these walls, but I'm gonna set it aside and it's all about you and what we're doing now. How do you teach and show your kids this is how we do it? Like right now, we're all in. And we understand that you may have failed that test or got in a car accident or whatever it may be. Any of those things could be going on. But how do you portray as the coaching staff? I got to lock in right now. Yep. When it's over, I got to go back to that situation and figure it out. But right now, I'm here.
Yeah, we literally teach it, right? And if it's worth teaching, it's worth practicing. So it's one of the things we talk to the kids about really, really early in the year. When they're walking in the room, about being all in, being where your feet are, not wanting to be anywhere else. We do a lot of journaling, and one of the types of journaling that we do is clear mind journaling, where you're literally just clearing all the stuff out of your mind, right? So whether people realize it or not, you have things that you're currently conscious or aware of, but you have stuff in your pre-conscious and your subconscious. So we'll have kids sit down and we'll give them a couple writing prompts and then a little free writing time. Hey, anything that comes to your mind, I want you to put it on paper. Anything. It could be the homework that you have later on. It could be the test you took earlier. Maybe you're having problems with, at home, or a girlfriend or a boyfriend. I'm the head girls and boys coach. And so, it may be something like that. When you write those things down, you get all that stuff out of your brain. Now you can lock in and be where your feet are. But again, I think it's teaching it. We can't just expect people. It's kind of like when you have children. I remember whenever I got 4 kiddos, and But I remember my girls, they are the two oldest, and they have two younger boys. When the girls are real little, sometimes getting mad at them about something, and I start to get onto them and correct them, and then I'm like, wait a minute, I expected them to know this, and I've never even taught them this. So I have to like stop, go back and teach them, hey, here are the expectations here. Here's the reason why you don't touch the hot stove or whatever it was, you know? And so that really helps in coaching too. Teach exactly what you want to see. And then, leaders are repeaters, man. So make sure that we repeat that and talk about that often. But we give them a couple of things. So one would be the journaling. Another one would be, and I'm gonna use Coach Miller again as an example. I'll tell you one how we do as coaches that I got from him. Something else with athletes, but sometimes having some sort of an actual cue. So hey, when you're getting ready, right, and you switch into your wrestling shoes, as soon as you put your wrestling shoes on and you put your other shoes in your locker, right, or you put them away, all your problems, all your issues, everything else, those things are still going to be there, but everything else gets put away with your shoes, right? Or the moment you step over the threshold into our wrestling room, everything else stays outside those doors. Now, the cool thing is once you've had a dose, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins, once you've gotten all those chemicals from your brain from working out and exercising, you'll probably be able to go back and attack those issues a little better and with a clearer mind, and you're going to feel better about those. But we're going to leave those outside the door, because if you can lock in a focus when you're in here, you are going to improve. You're going to get better in every way. Now, Coach Miller has a great story on this, and he calls it his 18 steps. So there's not 18 steps you do, but it was 18 steps from his office to the wrestling room door. And he said that there was a day he went into practice, was in a bad mood. It felt like everything was just spiraling. The practice was bad. He was getting mad at the guys. They were chirping at each other. Anyway, when practice was over, he was back in his office. And one of his assistant coaches, who had also wrestled for him, they had a great relationship, said, Coach, can I tell you something? And he had the relationship to do this. And he said, yeah. And he said, your mood sets the tone for the room. And Coach Miller is a real highly energetic guy. But he said, when you come in and you're energetic and you're pumped up and you're that Coach Miller, the guys respond. Man, they work hard, practice is good. But when something has happened and you come in and you're mad, frustrated, or, angry, whatever it is, the guys, like, they feel that. And then all of a sudden that's sort of contagious and it just snowballs. And he's like, I just wanted you to know that. And Coach Miller said it really hit home and he thought about it. So he made a decision, no matter how his day is gone, he has 18 steps to release everything else. And when he gets to the threshold of his wrestling room, he steps into Coach Miller mode when he walks into that room. And the cool thing is, when he made that mental decision and started being Coach Miller, his actual energy changed and his mood changed and his emotions changed. And he started to feel better, right? And so that's something too, man. Emotions are contagious. And if you're a leader, you have to truly understand that. So whenever we are off our game a little bit, as coaches, with my coaching staff, like, hey, we can go and have a conversation with each other. Coach, like, right now you're a little riled up, man. Like, we can calm down or whatever. But we try to make sure that we practice what we preach and we leave all the other stuff outside. And when we come in, we're all in. So it'd be like an alter ego. We teach our wrestlers to have an alter ego. But like, I'm Coach Parks or Chad Parks. But when I step in that room, I'm Coach P. And so I'm going to bring that Coach P energy when I step in the room. And when I say this, I want maybe there's like a younger coach listening. Something you got to understand is, don't try to be me. Don't try to be somebody else. I'm not trying to be someone else. I read Tony Dungy's The Mentor Leader when I was younger. Thankfully, my second or third year of coaching, and it was a game changer for me. Phenomenal book. But I really felt permission to coach. You're always wanting to get better, but to be my own personality, be my own self as a coach. I'm not trying to be my dad or Coach Thompson or anybody else. Now, I want to instill the good things I learned from them and use those, but with my own personality. Coach Tony Dungy, he doesn't cuss. He doesn't yell. He's mild tempered. And he actually, was passed over for several NFL jobs because of that. And then eventually ends up winning a Super Bowl. But after I read his book, I was like, man, I'm not a yeller. And so, I figure I can get a little fired up, but I'm not a yeller. And so, if I get to be me, that's more authentic anyway. And you're going to enjoy coaching that way. So when I say, like, Coach Miller is highly energetic, if that's not your personality, don't think you got to walk in and be that way. Walk in and be you, but try to be the best version of you, regardless of what's going on outside.
I love hearing that because, I coach youth sports and now I coach middle school basketball. And I've kind of fluctuated trying to figure out, like, the right demeanor, because I watch a lot of the high school coaches and try to learn from some of them, and some of them are mentors for me. But then it always comes back to the one thing I've always asked my kids is, you give me everything, I'm going to give you everything. And
Hmm.
so for me, I've got to be me on the sideline. And sometimes I get fiery, not even necessarily fiery, more just energetic, like excited when my kids make a play. Like, I want them to know that I'm engaged with them, and I'm here with you. Like, we're in it together. A lot of people are like, "Man, you're pretty active on the sideline." I'm like, I'm asking them to give me everything, and this is who I am. This is how I've always been, and so I've had to get comfortable with, it's just who I am. Like, I'm not being mean.
Hmm.
Like, I very rarely do I even talk to the refs or anything like that. I'm not yelling at people a lot of times. I have. There's those moments.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, that's a great lesson for anybody that wants to jump into any form of coaching. Is first step is, you got to be you. You got to know who you are, and you got to be authentic to you. Because if there's anybody that finds it out, figures it out faster, whether you're authentic or not, it's kids. They
Yes.
can tell pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
as we were talking about that, that story of Coach Miller, something that I saw the other day, and I've seen it multiple times. I think it was Michael Phelps talking about when he realized when he was having some bad days, he started, every time he'd walk through a doorway, he'd think of something positive. And he's like, I quickly realized I walk through a lot of doorways, and so there was a lot of positive things going through his head, and so I've relayed that to my kids, and I tell them all the time. I said, hey, things in life are going to go bad, but you got to have the ability to find the good in what's going on. There's always
Hmm.
good somewhere in what's going on, so you got to find it, and look at that. Like, the storm's coming, but somewhere in that storm, something's good. And one of the downsides of a thunderstorm and a rainstorm is it's dangerous, and there's lightning and everything. But one of the good things is it brings rain, and so, like,
Yeah.
you can find the good in that. Uh, you mentioned being the head coach of boys and girls wrestling. What has that experience been like at the high school level, coaching high school boys and high school girls? Because I know wrestling's relatively the same. Coach Johnson said there are some different things that maybe some girls can't do that most boys can do, or something. I think it was, I don't know if it was the sprawl or something. He said it's really hard for a lot of them to do that. It's just different. I, Not being a wrestling guy, I really don't understand what that meant. But what's it been like for you as the head coach of both programs?
I love it. I mean, yeah, wrestling's wrestling, right? But there are some differences for sure. Um, one of the great things is, and I would say most people nationwide would agree with this, like the rise of women's wrestling has reinvigorated guys wrestling as well. And when you look at statistics and look at data, there were a number of years where nationwide guys wrestling either just stayed level or was even dropping off. And then here comes girls wrestling, the explosion of it everywhere, the excitement behind that. So I think you'd add the excitement of mixed martial arts, which a lot of wrestlers are in there, and then girls wrestling. All of a sudden, it was just kind of like, okay, boys wrestling just naturally somehow started to go up again. So right now, looking at data, the last several years, wrestling is it's a growing sport, and us lifelong wrestlers and people in the wrestling world, we were worried for a while, like, man, just there was always that worry, like, is it going to get cut for the Olympics? And with Title IX, there were a lot of wrestling programs that had been put on the chopping block. That happens a bunch. Well, now, like, guess what? We have both. We have girls and boys. So there's a solution for Title IX. But overall, just the excitement around it is amazing. For us as a coaching staff, everyone on my staff, like, we coach both, and we love getting to do that. Our girls don't practice against the boys, but they do practice in the room at the same time. And so I would say a couple of things I've seen with that. One is our girls have taken on, our team is known for being pretty physical and just like aggressive, always in good shape. And I've had several coaches the last few years be like, man, your girls wrestle, like, are they in there with the boys? And I was like, yeah. So, man, we could tell, like, they have the exact same style. So our girls are physical and they're aggressive. So that has rubbed off on the girls. But I would say cultural wise, the girls just do a great job, one, having fun, two, cheering each other on, right? And just really having that team aspect. And so I would say that's helped the boys be able to, like, open up and cheer each other on and have a little more enjoyment and fun in the wrestling process as well. Technique wise, there are a few things that are different and you figure those out along the way. But for the most part, we run the same practice, the same technique. We lift weights 4 days a week, in season and out. We have like an off-season program for off-season athletes, and all my off-season wrestlers do that. But I don't know, we get after it, and both groups they just they jive well. And so we have several sayings that are like pillars for our program, but one team, one family. And so for us, that is both. And I love it whenever we are at a tournament or a meet or whatever, and you'll just see our girls down there cheering on the boys. You'll see our boys cheering on the girls. So, I see some programs that are completely separate and they still do a good job cheering each other on from the same school. Then you see some that don't even they have no interaction. I'm like, that is weird. Like, we're all the same school. So I love it that our kids have embraced that and our wrestling families have embraced that.
Before we transition to some of your other things that you've got going on, if I was to come to a practice, what are some of the things I'm going to hear that you speak about daily?
So I'll go ahead and use I would say our mottos or pillars. These are great culture builders. They're great PR builders too, right? If you're a head coach, you are the CEO of your program. And that means that you need to make sure that you're doing a good job with PR. Communication with your families, communication, that means the parents, the kids, your coaching staff, your administrators, all those things, social media presence, the whole thing in that you could just say, hey, this is a program's package. It's just something you got to do, right? And then employing and utilizing your assistant coaches and their skill sets to make all that work as well. And then other people in the school that help. But these are a couple things for us that I would say could cross over. We really truly believe and teach these, and they are the things that form the culture of our program. One is TCOB, that's take care of business. You're going to hear it all the time. Got that from my college coach at Labette, Coach Thompson, one of the best coaches ever been around. So we'd say TCOB. It means take care of business. The only rules that we have, if you look in, I call it my honor code handbook, and we have a handbook that we give out. The only rules that we have in the handbook is, one, follow USD 450 rules, our school district. So whatever their rules are, we're going to follow those. Two is take care of business, because that accompanies everything. That means if you're in the classroom, you're getting your work done, you're getting it on time, you're respectful, you're good to your teacher, you're good to your peers. If you are in the wrestling practice, you're working really hard, full effort. And the cool thing is, let's just say if a kid's struggling academically, well, I can call that kid over and we can pull up their power school and we can look and say hey man, you're missing 3 assignments right now. Are you taking care of business? No, sir. Yeah. Okay. Well, what are we going to do to remedy this? Right. What do you need to do? Tell me your game plan. Then give me a game plan. So take care of business covers about everything you can think of. Right. So that's one of them. The other one is GET, stands for gratitude, effort, and toughness. And we would say we get to do this, right? Just a mindset shift. I don't have to go to practice. I get to go to practice. I don't have to lift weights. I get to lift weights. I don't have to compete. I get to compete. Have to, there's a little I don't want to be made to do something. Get to, I enjoy this. I have some say in this. But gratitude, effort, and toughness. And so we speak on those and talk about those all the time. Having gratitude is your number one attitude. And then I'm a neuroscience nerd. So I go in, I break down all the neuroscience with gratitude, and I teach all that to the kids, and we talk about it a lot, and we have time, we journal it, and we have times where we have them say what they're grateful for, things like that. Okay. Effort is the next thing. Gratitude, effort, toughness. Running a podcast for a long time, right? I've gotten to have, high level D1 coaches and athletes and Olympians, but also, multimillionaire businessmen on there. And if you look, there's just no way around it. To be successful, do you want to be efficient? Do you want to find the best ways to do things? Yes. But ultimately, it comes down to work. You have to have work ethic. You got to work your tail off. It takes a lot of effort. So we talk about that, putting effort into every single thing we do. The way you do anything is the way you do everything. And then we give them methods, right? Methodologies, things like starting your day with the win, getting up and making your bed. So I start my day with the dub that way. So we go through building momentum, getting little wins throughout the day, and then being able to attack bigger things. And so those are all things, again, we talk about, we preach on all the time. And then toughness, of course, physical toughness. Wrestling is a very physical sport. So not being afraid to get hit in the face, right? But then that also applies to life. Sometimes you got to take chances in life. You got to bet on yourself. Maybe you're starting a new job or starting a podcast or whatever, right? And of course, we're asking God to help us in the process and trusting him. But don't be afraid to get hit in the face. And then, literally too. But so you have the physical toughness, but then the mental and emotional toughness. So we do a lot of mindset training, but the emotional toughness, that's a big thing. And again, like I said earlier, loving somebody, like that's hard, right? But it's not soft. It's not rainbow and sunshines. Sometimes it's like saying the hard things to somebody and holding them accountable. And sometimes it's building them up. And then, asking for help when you need it. Like emotionally, that's a big thing. Not being an island. Can't be an island. Girls are much better about building relationships and just talking to each other. Guys tend to be an island sometimes. But I think ultimately, overall, that's just one of the things that the enemy probably does to us is when you're going through something emotionally, he wants to isolate you, right? And so you begin to isolate yourself. So we talk about it all the time. Emotionally, man, the hardest and the toughest thing you can do is not to deal with it yourself, but to reach out and talk to your coaches or your teammates or your parents, or if we need to, then we'll get school counselors or whatever. So all that goes into the GET, right? Gratitude, effort, toughness, and then win the day. And just quickly, win the day for us stands for what's important now. So, which means focusing on that thing I can do right now instead of like looking at the whole season. What can I actually control right now? What can I do right now? That might be working hard in this drill. That might be making sure I'm going to bed at the proper time or I'm eating well and things like that. So those are the three main things we use: TCOB, GET, and win the day.
Dang, man. You have me so jacked right now. I could probably throw Cody Parks on the mat. Probably not, but I feel like I could. I really like all of those, specifically on GET, gratitude. I talk to my kids and that I coach and my three kids about gratitude and how if you have gratitude, the anxiety and all that other stuff can't exist at the same time.
That's
Like
right.
when you're doing that, it takes the place of that. And then for me as I coach, effort's always been non-negotiable. We're going to do that. Like you have to. Like that you control that 100% of the time. There's so many other factors you can't control. That's one thing you can control. And then toughness, specifically with wrestling, but any sport or anything you do in life. I think it was Pastor Erwin McManus, one of my clips of him, he talks about joy is on the other side, fear. Because
Mm-hmm.
your joy is on the other side of fear. You got to have the toughness to step through that fear, whatever it
Yeah.
is, and it's there. But not a lot of people they bump into that wall of fear or lack of toughness or whatever you want to call it, and never really truly get to that joy. So,
Yeah. It's
man,
good.
your kids, no wonder they're tough. Like they get going. But
Yeah.
so you in 2023, you became the Washburn University football leadership coach. Explain to us what that is.
Yeah. So when I moved over or transitioned into Fellowship of Christian Athletes as my full-time job, at that time, Coach Sherg was the head football coach at Washburn. He had been for 20 plus years. And we were in a leadership group, a men's leadership group together, that's separate from our church. We're part of that, but then we also go to church together. I do a lot of speaking. So he had brought me in several times to speak to his team, just motivational type speaking. So when I moved into FCA, I talked to him and was telling him about it. And he said, "Hey man, you have an open door with us." And he's like, "Actually, let's come in, have you speak to the team. I'm going to let them know and, kind of tell them what you're going to be doing. And then whatever you want to do with the team, you can do, man. Like just be around." I was like, "All right, awesome." So one of the things that we talk about in FCA is ministry of presence, which is just showing up, right? Being there. So I speak to the team, he tells them that. And then I just become this weird dude that's just showing up at practice every day. And they're probably like, "Okay, why is this guy coming to every practice?" I'm just standing on the side. And I have several guys that play football at Washburn that wrestle for me, but there's, 120, 130 guys on the team. So a lot of these guys don't know who I am. There's the guy that came and spoke to us and those type of things. But what's cool is when you're consistent and, in life, we got to be consistent. But when you just show up day in, day out to practice, all of a sudden more guys start to come over and talk to you, and the more coaches start to talk to you, and you start to develop relationships and people start to open up. Well, Coach Sherg said, and this is after a couple weeks into the season, so I think we had just gotten through fall camp. And I was just sitting in his office one day and we're talking. And he said, "Hey, we started this leadership program. We started it last year. We chose leaders, and the goal was to meet every other week and to kind of pour into them and help them become better leaders. And then that will trickle down, then they'll help the team." And he said, "Honestly, like we get so busy with the X's and O's, we kind of just forgot about it." And he said, "Would you want to take over there?" And I was like, "Yeah, that'd be awesome." And I was like, what do you want me to do? He's like, whatever you want. I'm like, all right, cool. So I meet with the guys that they had selected and went in and I study leadership. I'm not a good reader, but I'm very disciplined. So I'm an avid reader. So I read a lot and I listen to a lot of books and podcasts. And, so I start introducing them to some of the things that I think were very transformational for leadership. We met, I think, maybe twice. So, there was a week in between. And the guy said, hey, can we start doing this every week? I was like, yeah, awesome. And it turned into a thing. So we did it the whole year. Fast forward, Coach Sherrick he's the quarterback's coach at North Alabama. There were some coaching changes at Washburn. Coach Watkins, who had played football there and coached with Coach Sherrick, he took over as the head coach. And I'd like to think it was the day after he took over, he called me and said, hey, can you come meet with me? So I met, and he said, I still want to keep doing your leadership thing and some other roles that you do on the team. I also kind of help serve as a chaplain and some stuff like that. And he said, would you be willing to do that? And I'm like, oh, absolutely. So the way they do it, this is how we've done it the last 2 years, all the players apply to be, and we call it the Influence Council. So all the players apply to be on the Influence Council. And then the coaching staff, they look at all the applications and they pick the top 18 guys. And then the criteria is 1, you're good at football. 2, you make good grades. 3, you have good character. Okay. And then they try to make it, I would say kind of comprehensive, where you have O-line, D-line, you have linebackers represented, running backs represented, you got a QB in the room, and then different grade levels as well. Those guys are now in charge of small groups. And so I meet with them every Wednesday, and we do leadership training every single Wednesday, and we do it year round. So we go in, I have a lesson planned, and there's just a lot of discussion, a lot of talking back and forth. And then they go and teach their groups those things. And it's been super impactful. I would like to say it's been super impactful for their team. I know it's been super impactful for those guys because they say it. It has been for me, and it is a blessing to get to do it. I love getting to go work with those guys and do that. And even though I'm older than them, it's like, you can be learning from everybody all the time. So we get to be in this together and to learn from each other, right? And then also there's some responsibilities in there where if Coach Watkins says, hey, there are some things that I want to see, he can now communicate with me. I talk to the guys about it. They make sure those things are communicated to the team. If the team has some ideas or thoughts, right, they can come to me. I talk to Coach Watkins, and then he can decide if he wants to implement those things or not. So it's sort of, I get to be a good go through, and again, I'm at most practices. I travel with the team. I'm on the sidelines with the team, and I get to serve. And they have a pastor, TD Hicks, that has been with them for 20 plus years. And so him and I get to kind of, go back and forth and do chaplain stuff. And it's awesome. Get to do a Bible study with the coaches, and that's through FCA. So do a Bible study, and, more than half the coaching staff comes to Bible study. We have different things that the Influence Council came up with, man, that we hadn't done previously, but pre-game prayer stuff, post-game prayer stuff. And anyway, so I don't know, man, it's a blessing. And I love the sport of football, and I coached it for a long time. And my wife coaches volleyball and softball, and we have 4 kids, and we're both busy. So I stepped away from that, but this gets my foot back in the door, and I get to be around football, but I also don't have to watch film for 40 hours a week either. So best of both worlds.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. And that kind of leads us right into your role right now. You said full-time FCA, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, which is a great organization. Let's start with the high school ranks. How do you go about connecting with high schools, especially the public schools, where I know they allow it, but some people question it? How do you connect with the local high schools and high school kids?
Yeah. That was a blessing, because when I very first started, there were no FCA organizations in Topeka. Washburn Rural kind of had an FCA, and now I didn't know this prior to working with FCA, but you actually have to go through the entire certification process. We call them huddles. So if you have like an FCA club at your school, there are many schools that have FCA, but it's not certified. They just use the name. They don't realize like, hey, this is like an actual real like international organization, right? And it's we have employees, and we have a lot of it goes pretty in depth. And so to certify that huddle, there's a lot of things that need to happen too. And so anyway, there are no certified huddles, and I think Washburn Rural is the only one. Now, Shawnee Heights had it at one time. The coach that used to run it at the high school left. It never got restarted. COVID happens right around that time, all the stuff. Anyway, so It's crazy because when I took the job, I don't know if it had even been announced yet. And I was going over to the high school to go in and run off-season weightlifting in the spring. And I'm walking in, and our track coach is walking out, and real strong believer. And he said, "Hey, Coach Parks," and he was like, "Man, I've been thinking like we need to restart FCA here, need to get it going." And I was like, "I'm your dude, because if we're getting ready, I'm getting ready to do this as a full-time job, man." So we had a conversation about it. And the guy that ran FCA at Washburn Rural was a teacher there, and we go to church together. We're also in that same leadership group together, and so had a conversation with him. So we went about kind of learning together, man, because I had to learn a new job, right? How do I certify these, and what's the whole process, and what's the process that the coaches and teachers that are running these clubs, they have to go through certifications and trainings and stuff like that as well. So we got it going at Washburn Rural High School, got it going at Shawnee Heights High School. I taught at the middle school. That's where I taught for 20 years. So I went in, talked to them. They said, yes, let's do a club. We got it going there. And then Topeka High a couple years ago, their head football coach had just came here. I think he came from Augusta, called me, said, "Hey, I heard you're the FCA guy in the area. I was involved with the FCA at my last school. How do we do it?" We got it going at Topeka High. Next year, we got it going at Topeka West. And then at Washburn University, it started with the football team. But my goal was, okay, I'm gonna work with the football team here. And man, you got 120, 130 guys plus a large coaching staff. It's a lot of people to pour into and to try to build this with. But ultimately, I also want to get an all sport huddle, which means we have people from every sport coming to FCA. So after the first year, going to the second year, my plan was to get this started. I had several football players ask me about it. And then I'm at church, walking out of church, and this is like 2 weeks before school starts. I'm walking out of church, and a girl who I'd never met comes up and says, "Hey, somebody told me you're the FCA guy. I was at a Division I school last year playing golf, but I'm from Topeka. I transferred back. I'm going to play golf at Washburn, and I was part of FCA at the last school. How do we get it started at Washburn?" And I was like, "We're getting ready to do that." So right away, I had several college students that we could integrate as leaders, and we got the all sport huddle going. And I'm telling you, man, God just, well, right now there's a move amongst our middle school, high school, and college kids toward Jesus. Can't explain it, but there is, right? So you see the Jesus One Church, you see all the things that happened at Ohio State University and several places. We just saw the NFL draft, how many people are, and that's always, I think, been kind of sport, but you just see it growing more and more, people getting bolder. But I think a lot of our young people are looking for, like, man, what's the truth? Like, what's real in this world? And they're coming to realize, like, oh, it's Jesus, right? So at the middle school right now, Shawnee Heights is the only middle school program that I work with, but this has nothing to do with me. This is, again, God's just opened doors. We have to do a 7th grade week and an 8th grade week, because we have 100 7th graders and 100 8th graders. And like, all right, we can't control 200 kids at once in the gym. It's too crazy. So we just, go back and forth. Same thing at the high school. We have 120 to 160 kids that come to our club. Washburn Rural is the same thing. Washburn University, we have 60 to 80 athletes that roll in every Wednesday. And we just literally sit and talk and study the Bible, and we have leaders that do that stuff. God's at work. It's good. Our goal is to continue to move into other schools here in town or in the area. But I was told real early in this by Ty Zimmerman, who's my direct boss. And Ty said, you're going to want to go and like get FCA in every school. You're going to want to do that, especially, you're a coach, you're an athlete, you're driven. He said, but here's the thing. We don't want to be a mile wide and 1 inch deep. So when doors open, walk through those doors, and then we're going to go deep, because there's a lot of coaches in those schools. And one of the things that we do with the FCA is to and through the coach, knowing that like the coaches have a lot of impact. And, Billy Graham saying, coaches will impact more people in 1 year than most people, or more students or youth in 1 year than most people get to do in a lifetime. And so really pouring into coaches. And I know for me personally, I'm like, man, that's something that I needed that I didn't know I needed. Because if you're a leader of any kind, right? If you're in any sort of leadership role, you're the CEO of your company, you're a pastor, you're a teacher, you're a coach, you're a principal in a school, you have a lot on your shoulders. And, being a head coach, I have great assistant coaches, and we discuss many things, but ultimately, like, there's a lot of weight that comes with that. And I don't want to just like put all that on my wife all the time. Right. And I also shouldn't just hold it all within. So having somebody that you can just sit and talk with and bounce ideas off of, or they just pour into you, is a beautiful thing. It's one of the things that we get to do with coaches. And not every coach is a believer, man, but there are many coaches that say like, hey, I would love to just sit and have a conversation, and we get to do that and get to build those relationships. So that's kind of where we're at. And again, like I said, hopefully it continues to grow, but I just know that we'll try to do our part, and ultimately, God opens up doors. And real quick, along with that, there's a scripture. I wrote it on a note a couple years ago. I don't know why I was reading it; just popped out to me, and I read it every morning when I sit down here at my desk. But it says, "Let the favor of the Lord our God be on us. Establish the work of our hands. Establish the work of our hands." It says it twice, so it's probably important, right? And that's Psalm 90:17. So one thing I pray is that God establishes the work of my hands, whether that is in FCA or coaching or with my own family, whatever it is I'm going to do. I want to ask God to lead that and guide that, and then hopefully I can hear that and follow. I'm a knucklehead and I'm a human, so I mess up too, but try to do that as much as possible.
We all are, and everybody that's ever been around, except for the one, has messed up. So, there's only one perfect person ever, and that's Jesus Christ. And circling back, you mentioned that you were at a crossroads, teaching, coaching, ministry. If you're open to it, I'm just curious, like, how did you come into your faith, and how did you ultimately end up here at FCA? Like, how did you transition into wanting to kind of lead this ministry?
Yeah, as far as coming to my faith, I think I believed in God my whole life. I believed in Jesus, but I was not a Jesus follower. We went to church till I was about in third grade, and I'm not even really sure why, but we stopped going to church. And I remember my dad teaching me to pray when I was young, but I was wild, man. I was like one of those wild wrestler guys, and people that are in the wrestling world know that, those type of things. We know that stigma or those type of people. And I was one of them dudes. And luckily, sports kind of kept me on the right road somewhat. But it was my freshman year at Missouri Valley. So I'd come in and, I was doing really well in wrestling, and then got injured and was feeling sorry for myself. And I was far from home, don't have very much money, and I only went home once that entire year. So I went home over Christmas break, came back. But when I very first arrived at school, there was a guy, his name was Vince. And Vince was a senior, and he played football and ran track there. Vince was actually on the Odessa Permia Mojo Magic teams that Friday Night Lights was made about. And there's another book that's been written about Friday Night Lights. And Vince is actually, there's a chapter in that book about Vince as well. It's pretty cool. He had a very rough upbringing. But Vince was a Christian, lived in the dorms on purpose. It was like part of his ministry. So I meet him for the very first time. A week later, I see him again. He remembers my name, comes up, gives me the dap hug. We talk for a little bit, invites me to church. Keeps inviting me to church every time I see him, inviting me. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go one of these days. I'm going one of these days. Always had an excuse. Never went. Well, second semester, like I said, I'm feeling sorry for myself, got injured. And all of a sudden I see Vince, and he was like, hey, man, come to church with me. And I was like, you know what? I think I will. And I went. And so go to church, and I loved it. And I went for a couple weeks, and then another week. And then, I don't know, somewhere in that process, I felt like God took like a really, really hard heart, and a guy that had a lot of anger and meanness in him. I was just like the little mean wrestler, and he just started softening it. And all of a sudden, man, transition. And I think about, it's in the Bible, but it's a pretty cool story. And it just talks about the potter's wheel, right? And how a potter was sitting there, and he was molding and making the clay into a pot. And then it said it had a mar, had a crack in it. And then he like remolded it into a vessel that could be used. And I kind of feel like that's what God did with me. He just took this broken, messed up dude who was a pretty good athlete, but was just sort of a mess, and remolded me into something he could use. And so that was my story, giving my life to Christ. And at that point, I just decided, I already believed in him, but like, okay, I'm going to surrender. I'm going to follow. I'm actually going to be a Jesus follower. Started really reading my Bible and studying my Bible. And then God just started changing. Again, not perfect. That's why we need Jesus. But God just started changing my heart, my mind. FCA, our statewide director, she brings this up a lot whenever I get to work with a lot of coaches, and we're always looking to recruit coaches and get them into FCA and working with us. But she always tells them that I'm the person that here in Kansas they pursued for the longest. So they asked me for 13 years to come work for FCA. But they didn't allow coaches to come on full time with FCA and continue coaching. And for me, they wanted you to be all in and not and there was a guy that said this to me one time, and he just said it's hard to lead these coaches on a Bible study, let's say on a Wednesday morning, and then you're like screaming across the mat from them on Saturday, and it's like, I get that, man, but also man, what a better, is there a better way to be able to build into people's lives, right, than to coach? And so 3 years ago, had a buddy that called me up out of nowhere. Actually didn't call me, he texted me like probably 10 o'clock at night, and just the text said FCA. I text back, yeah, I love FCA. And I was like, it's awesome. And he said, let's talk about it tomorrow. I said, okay. So he called me, and then he said, hey, I just met with Ty Zimmerman. Ty and I had a great talk, and he told me all the stuff that's going on in Junction City and Manhattan and in Kansas. I think we need that in Topeka. What would you think about coming on with FCA? And this guy is a businessman, is a close friend. And I said, I think it'd be pretty cool. So the state leader comes and meets with me, and our state director, she meets with me. We have a conversation. She said, well, we've changed our stance, and now you can coach. So at that point, I'm like, oh, okay, this is something I might really do. But I tell you what, if you're looking to change careers or to not toe dip, to jump into something else, to pursue something else, it is nerve-wracking, right? I had kind of felt I love coaching. I liked teaching a lot. I loved teaching, but there were many times where I'm teaching middle school PE and kids are playing a game, and I'm like, man, I kind of feel like there's something else or something more I can be doing. I just don't know what it is, right? I don't know what it is. I don't want to get out of education, but I don't know what it is. So after talking to her and then coming home, talking to my wife and having the conversation, I decided I think I want to pursue this, but I didn't want to give up coaching. So I texted my athletic director and our principal, and I just said, hey, can I come and meet with you guys? It's not bad, I promise. Because that's a text you probably don't want to get from one of your coaches or teachers or whatever out of the blue. And I said, but I have a job offer outside of teaching, but I still want to be the head coach. And our principal texted back right away, and he's a real strong believer. And he said, what is it, coach? And I said, Fellowship Christian Athletes. He said, if it's on your heart, do it. You're still going to be our head wrestling coach. We have several other Rule 10 head coaches. So my wife and I talked, decided, and one of the things with FCA is you have to fully fundraise your entire salary. That was really scary. So talking with that buddy again, he said, what would hold you back? I said, two things. One is I have a wife and 4 kids. It's really scary to fundraise my salary. That's really scary. The other part is I've been teaching at this same school for 19 consecutive years. I taught another school for 3 years before that, but I can do it with my eyes closed, right? I know what I'm doing. It's scary to walk out of those doors and think I'm not coming back in these doors, and I'm having to learn something completely new. And anyway, he said, well, if I can help you with the fundraising aspect, I know people, and I'm a business guy. If I can help you there, would you feel a little more confident? I said, absolutely. Prayed about it. My wife and I prayed about it. Felt it was the right thing. The hardest part for me was I made the decision. I went through the whole interview process, got it, was telling my middle school principal. And I was like, golly, I do not want to tell him. I don't want to tell him I'm leaving. And we had I think 2 teachers retire that year, had been there for 30 plus years. We had 2 teachers that they transitioned to the high school that had been teaching for a long time. So I'm going to be like the 5th teacher who has been there for a long time. And I walk in, I knock on his door and said, can I talk with you? And he said, Coach, this only happened for 2 reasons. Either somebody got in trouble and they're trying to get ahead of it, or they're going to change jobs. And he said, what is it? And I said, well, thankfully I'm not in trouble. And I said, but I am looking to change jobs. So I told him, and he was very supportive and said, I think you're right for that role. And was very supportive. And so, yeah, so that's how I got into the FCA thing. And again, I mean, even after I made that decision, there was nights I laid in bed and I was sweating, like literally sweating, like cold sweat. I'm thinking about leaving, packing myself out of my office and leaving. That was hard. But the moment I started doing FCA, I've not looked back. I know it's what I was called to do. And who knows, man, if God wants me to do this the rest of my life, I will. If it's something else, it'll be something else. But right now in this season, like everything, there's hard days and there's good days, but it's something that I felt like I'm supposed to be doing, and it's been a blessing.
Well, I can't stop smiling because that just warms my heart that there's people like you that are pouring into the young people in Topeka and just anywhere. I felt the same way when I was talking to Ty about what he's doing around the Junction City area, and then all these coaches I've talked to pour into it, but you're also doing it from 2 aspects: the coaching aspect, but also the faith aspect of FCA. So, and I could sit here and listen to you talk forever. maybe I should just start listening to your podcast. That might be easier, but
So I haven't. I'm not on that. I did my podcast for I don't know how many years, number of years. I have 160 plus episodes, and I actually stopped doing it when I started doing FCA. Now I put several videos on social media. I just sat down. I have my idea. I sat down and I just shoot those and post them. I probably, and many people have asked me, like, when are you going to restart your podcast? But because we didn't have any FCA in Topeka, I didn't want to have divided attention. And so I was like, I got to go all in on this thing. And so I've done that. But now that I think I'm not inventing the wheel, or I kind of know what I'm doing, I probably should get back in there and start getting it rolling again. And again, I still try to give great messages on Instagram and TikTok. I post those to both places. But getting to speak with people and interview people, it's awesome. It's amazing. Like, I don't know how you feel, but I know every single time I would interview somebody, I would get done and I would just be like, just, it felt so cool just being able to learn from people and interact and build relationship.
Oh yeah, this is so you're going to be episode 33 for me, and I started about 6 months ago, and I would say 22 of the 33, just like with you, first time I've actually physically talked to you is when you pop up on the screen, and that's been awesome because
Yeah.
I don't like I enjoy the ones where I know the people just as much, but I also really enjoy getting to know all these other wonderful people. Real quickly before we get to my final questions, tell me about Game Changing Moves, the Amazon #1 best-selling book. What made you write a book?
Yeah. There was a point where I was really into, I mean, I'm still really into health and nutrition, but a lot of nutrition stuff. And I was leading some groups and some workout groups and things like that. And there were some people in that group, and they said, like, man, you should start, like, some of the things that you teach, you should start writing some of this stuff, like start a blog. And I was like, a blog? I was like, I don't even read blogs. Like, what? And but then I don't know, the thought stuck in my head, and I started looking, and some of my favorite authors at that time had blogs. And so I was like, okay, I think I'm going to do this, and I'm going to create this discipline no matter what, no matter how I feel, right? Just like anything else. It doesn't matter if I feel like exercising or not. I exercise. It's a non-negotiable. Same thing. I'm going to write 2 blogs per week. So every single week I wrote 2 blogs, and I understood the blogs I liked reading the most, my favorite authors. They were not super long, and people's attention spans are not getting longer. My attention span's not that long. So I was like, I'm going to keep these, to 1,000 words or 1,500 words or something like that. So I would write these blogs and started just to put them on Facebook. That was the only social media I was using. And so I put them on there and started getting really good feedback. And then, from people, and friends and things like that. And next thing you know, though, I would be somewhere and somebody would be like, oh man, I read your blog. Like, that was awesome. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. So I did that for, I don't remember, it was either 2 or 3 solid years, twice a week. I wrote a blog twice a week, just got very consistent with it. And so this is a funny story. I'll try to make it as much tell as much brevity as possible. But I thought maybe one day, like when I'm, in my 50s or 60s or something, I'll write a book. But it was not like in my scope for right now at all. Christmas break, I was out doing something. I came home. Wife and kids are making sugar cookies, and they have like Christmas shapes, cross, but an angel, a Christmas tree, things like that. And so I go over. I'm looking at them, and one of my sons, he was really young at the time. My wife said, "Hey, Luke is his name. Luke wanted to use this chicken cutout, and he called it a Christmas chicken. So we have to make Christmas cookies with it." And so I'm laughing. Well, I come to my office and I started working on something, and it just hit me. And I wrote a story, and it's about the nativity scene, but from the perspective of an animal, the Christmas chicken. And I wrote it for my kids. I took it upstairs. I read it to them. When I got done, my wife goes, "That literally might be the best thing you've ever written." Which I was like, I don't know if my feelings should be hurt right now or what. It took me like 3.5 minutes to write. She was like, no, I'm serious. Like, this should be a book. Like, you should make a kid's book out of this. And I was like, really? She said, yeah. Text a buddy who's very connected in many worlds and said, hey, do you know anyone that helps write books? Next day, he connects me via email with a guy who's helped a couple of New York Times bestsellers. He said, hey, this is Coach Parks. He writes these blogs. He writes them about leadership and coaching. It's leadership, coaching, and faith, right? And so he writes these things. And I want to connect you guys. Well, the guy says, let's have coffee. And so I'm like, I cannot take the Christmas chicken to this guy, So I go sit down and he's like, well, these are the things you write about. And he goes, so you should put those things in a book. And he said, okay, here's what we're going to do. After a long conversation, he said, now this is in December. Wrestling is a winter sport, right? We're wrestling all the way till the end of February. He said, I'm going to give you till spring break, and I want the manuscript at spring break. I know you're busy, but if I don't tell you an exact limit, you just won't get it done. You put it off. So I leave and I call my wife and said, hey, I'm writing a book. And she was like, oh, are you going to get the Christmas chick? I was like, no, like I'm going to have to write a book, and I've committed to it now. So I came home. I'm like, I don't know how to write a manuscript. I'm like Googling, like, what font do you use? Like, what spacing do you use? Like, if I'm going to turn this into, somebody who possibly could publish this, like, I have no idea. So I do that. But what I did is I was able to use data. So I went back and I looked at all my blogs, which blogs did the best. Okay. I narrowed it down to those. Now, which of those maybe can stay within a theme? Because, every now and then there was like an offshoot blog. I would write about something, cut some of those out. Which ones did the best on social media? All right, I'm going to put those together. Going back to the same guy who very first talked to me about FCA, he had given me a leadership book. I had read it, I consumed it, and I was like, if I ever write a book, I want to write it like this. Every chapter was like 2 and 3 pages long. It had guiding questions at the end. Each chapter was its own lesson. You didn't have to like go back and remember. So if you set it down, you don't have to remember where you're at. Like, every chapter was different. So I was like, oh, I'm going to write a book like that someday. Well, the blog kind of made that perfect. So I organized it, had to come up with a name. I wrote an introduction, wrote a conclusion, got it all put together. Go meet back up with this guy, spring break, and I'm sweating bullets. I'm like, oh man, he's gonna be like, this dude is terrible at writing. And I'll tell you something. So I always tease about this, but I'm an Okie through and through, right? I grew up in Oklahoma, been in Kansas a long time, but I'm an Okie. I'm terrible at spelling. And if you hear the way we say some of our words in Oklahoma and then the way they're spelled, it makes no sense, right? So I remember like sometimes learning a word and being like, that's not how you say it at all. So I'm bad at spelling. But also because of that, I'm like a living thesaurus, because there are many times where I had to write and I was like, I don't know how to spell that. So I'd like come up with a different word that meant the same thing. So it's given me an ability to write. But anyhow, I'm thinking like, okay, this guy is going to shoot me down. I give him the manuscript. We have a conversation. He said, I'm going to read it. I'm going to get back with you in 2 weeks. Called me 2 weeks later and he said, this is really good and we got to get it out there. Then I had to find a publisher. I thought he was going to help me do that. And he was like, no, you got to do that. I'm like, the wrestling world, man, it is a small community. I email a bunch of coaches and said, coaches, I've written a manuscript. I got a book. It's got a bunch of wrestling stuff involved. Do any of you know a publisher? 2 days later, I get an email from a guy I'd met maybe once in person, and we kind of just knew each other, acquaintances. He says, hey, Coach Parks, I heard you're going to write a book. I sent this all around the nation to all kinds of people, and 5 or 6 people said you need to get a hold of Cross Training Publishing in Nebraska. They publish most of the FCA's books. And I was like, okay, cool. So I get it, and I contact the owner, and he says, yeah, I'll read your manuscript. I send it to him, calls me back up and says, let's publish this book, and publish it. Now, I had to learn a lot, man. I didn't realize, like, when you're publishing a book, like, a lot of the marketing is on you and those type of things. But yeah, it was cool because I did not work for FCA at the time, and it got to be in the FCA magazine, and I learned a ton from that. I also learned how much support there is, and you just go to your family and friends and the people that you know and that love you and that you love, and there are a lot of people willing to help you. I think it's a really good lesson. There are a lot of great people around you willing to help you in so many things in life, and I think a lot of times we're afraid to ask, or we don't even think to ask. So yeah, so that's how it's a long story of how the book got written, and it's I don't know, man. It was good. It's a blessing. Hopefully, it still blesses people. I give it out, and there's still people that buy it. Ultimately, I would say, when I wrote the book, it's not like I'm gonna write this book and be like a multimillionaire. Like, I wanted to take a lot of lessons that I had learned over the years from phenomenal coaches and mentors and people important to my life. This was like actually the heart behind it. I do not want those lessons to be lost, and so I want to get those on paper. I want my kids to see those one day. And I also want anybody else I can get it in their hands to see and learn those lessons, and that it can help in their life. And then I attach scripture to all the lessons, and there's guiding questions at the end of every chapter and scriptures that go with it. So yeah, it was a cool learning process, and it was really, really good to do.
I love that mindset. I do the same thing. I read my devotional every morning, and I put it out on social media. And if nobody else reads it, I'm perfectly fine with that. But if one person does and gets something from it, it's a win.
Absolutely.
And So you can get it on Amazon. It's Game Changing Moves. I went out and it'll be here this weekend. So we're gonna see what you have to say, Coach. I'm really
Awesome.
excited. I actually I don't know if you know Brandon Clark at Derby. He wrote a book, One Degree Compass, and I bought it, read it, and both of them sound like my style of book. Real short chapters, quick,
Mhm.
easy reads, things that my lack of attention span doesn't impact. So I'm super excited. But well, let's get to the quick hitters here at the end. The first one is a good one for me, maybe not for you. Give me some of your all-time favorite, not favorite, bad word choice. Nix it. We're gonna start again. All-time best wrestlers you've had the opportunity to coach.
Tanner Gardner. Tanner was a two-time state champion at Shawnee Heights. So when I student taught there, Tanner was wrestling at Shawnee Heights. I was at Topeka High for 3 years, then came back and took over Shawnee Heights as the head coach. But I also privately trained Tanner that entire time. And so Tanner ended up being a two-time state champion at Shawnee Heights, three-time All-American at Stanford University. So that was a really, really good one. Tanner's an amazing human being. He was an athletic director at Rice University. Now he's the athletic director at Pepperdine University. He's just a high accomplishing human being, but great wrestler. So yeah, definitely Tanner's up there. Donnie Lockhart, undefeated state champion, was a stud. Tyson Tolkus, undefeated state champion, is a stud. I can't take all the credit for this one. Atticus Disney. Atticus was at Andover and transferred up here senior year, but I had coached him on the national team in freestyle and Greco. And then his dad got transferred to Topeka. He wrestled for me, three-time state champion. He was an absolute monster. I've been blessed. Nick Meck. Nick was a couple-time state champ for me, and Nick currently fights in the PFL. He is a really highly accomplished MMA fighter, and that's one of my other secret side jobs. I coached MMA fighters for a long time and trained fighters, and I've cornered in pretty much every organization except for the UFC. I've been on Bellator, been on PFL, so I got to be on ESPN several times as a coach, coaching these guys. But Nick is still currently coaching or still currently fighting. Now I stopped coaching MMA fighters, but I still have some of my former guys that asked me to come and be their corner man. So I get to go do that, which is really cool. So yeah, and then currently, like we've had several state champions. We had 3 girls win state titles this year, which was a blessing. And so I don't know, man. And it's not just winning state titles, right? Sometimes like you see a kid that just way surpasses their expectations and ours. And that's one of the coolest things to see as well. And they may have been, hey, they just qualified for state or they took 5th at state. But like when we first watched them wrestle, no one would have ever thought they would have got there. So that's a blessing too, getting to watch those kids.
So I want to flip it, and obviously the state of Kansas has a wonderful wrestling tradition throughout the state. Give me a few of the kids that you've had to help some of your athletes compete against and figure out how to beat in wrestling.
Yeah. I think I got to coach against Wyatt Hendrickson a couple times. We never had anybody beat Wyatt. That was a really good one. You know, I don't know, man. There's been so many good wrestlers out there. And I can't say like, hey, I've coached my kids and that we've been able to beat these kids, but just off the top of my head, some of the just monsters that have come from Kansas. Kendrick Maple, he is the head assistant coach at University of Missouri. I coached Kendrick at several camps growing up, got to coach him on the national team a little bit. And then we did a wrestling camp together for a number of years. Kendrick is incredible. Tim Elliott was a high school state champion, JUCO state champion at Labette, national runner-up for Central Oklahoma. He's been fighting in the UFC for like 12 years now. So got to coach against him, got to coach him at camps, and then got to coach with him at camps. Real good buddy of mine. He's legit. So yeah, we've had a lot of just great wrestlers come out of the state of Kansas. Being from Oklahoma, and I would consider Oklahoma one of the better wrestling states and a great wrestling state, especially in the Midwest. Hey, what man, Kansas is underrated. We produce, people. So when I was coming through college, you only had a handful of colleges that had wrestling. Fort Hays was the only 4-year school at that time. And now we have a ton of colleges that have wrestling. And I love every level. Some people are like, D1 or bust. I'm not that way at all. But if we were to take a lot of these great wrestlers that we've had and start a D1 program, I think it could be very successful. Not just on Kansas kids. The best programs are getting kids from everywhere, but we have plenty of Kansas kids that could fully contribute.
Speaking of Oklahoma, and in Kansas. You're very familiar with both. Give me 2 or 3 kids from each that would you personally, from your opinion, would put up there as arguably the best in each of those states.
Yeah, I mean, currently, there's several good ones, but like if we're talking about Oklahoma, just going back, I mean, the tradition. But you have John Smith, who was a long time Oklahoma State wrestling coach. But John Smith was a multiple time national champion in college, 2-time Olympic champion, 6-time world champion, one of the greatest wrestlers ever. I grew up going to his camps my entire life. Kenny Monday, Olympic champion, also wrestled for Oklahoma State. Got to go to clinics and camps with him. I remember being a little kid and like rolling and wrestling with him when I was a little kid, and him coming into our high school and teaching at a camp and a clinic. Those are a couple of greats from Oklahoma. And then Dayton Fix. Dayton Fix is a really cool story. He ended up being a real good wrestler for Oklahoma State as well. But he was a kid that, like, his dad was a longtime coach, but he didn't start wrestling until he was in middle school. He just watched wrestling, was like, I don't want to do it, and then finally just decided, I think I'm going to wrestle. And then the guy ends up being, I think he ended up winning 4 state titles in Oklahoma. I'm not sure, but I know he won a bunch, and then was an absolute monster for Oklahoma State. And, so there's been numerous from the state of Oklahoma that have come through, and they're going to continue to produce them. I do want to give a shout out to a current Oklahoma wrestler, though. A good friend of mine who was a college teammate, Josh Peak, his son, Rhett. They took a different route. Rhett was homeschooled, and in Oklahoma, you cannot wrestle for a school if you're homeschooled. And he got to his freshman year because of COVID, and everybody was online. So he did online and got to wrestle. But after that, they just homeschooled, and he decided that Greco-Roman was his thing. And so while he was in high school, he was traveling the country and going and staying in Oregon and Washington and at the U.S. Olympic Training Center in Colorado and all these places training, and then he ended up winning Fargo, which is like a really elite high school national for freestyle and Greco. Won Fargo, and he placed in U23s. He's 19 or maybe he's 20 years old now. He just took 5th at the senior level, which is like the Olympic level. Barely lost on the front side. I mean, he's right there with the studs. He's 19 or 20 years old, and he's just decided he's just going to lock in a Greco. So they just started a new Greco program in Oklahoma that he's now part of. He was at the Olympic Training Center. He came back to be a part of this. I think it's called Position Wrestling. And they, as a team, sent 5 guys to the U.S. Open last weekend, and all 5 guys placed, and they took 5th out of 32 teams there with 5 guys, which is pretty amazing. So anyway, cool. So yeah, shout out to my buddy Josh, to his son Rhett.
What's, in your opinion, what's the top college wrestling program?
Without a doubt, Penn State. Yeah. Kel Sanderson has. So when I grew up, we had John Smith style of wrestling. We had Oklahoma State style, and they were a powerhouse. And then Iowa was a powerhouse, and I loved Dan Gable, but I loved to hate Iowa like all the other Oklahoma people did. And it's funny because when I got into college, I actually wrestled more of an Iowa style. But those were the powerhouse programs. When Penn State really blew up, it changed the way I coach. It changed the way many people coach and approach wrestling. Like, wait a minute, these guys are like wide open, and they're scoring a ton of points and pinning everybody, and they're having fun. They're in great shape. They're working hard, but they're having fun. They're keeping joy in the program. And I've got to interview some Penn State wrestlers. I've got to have some behind the scenes talks with some people that have been part of the program and hear some of the things that Kel does that we've implemented into our program. But I think he has changed the way many of us view wrestling, and it has made wrestling more enjoyable.
What would be, throughout your high school or college career, do you have one match that was your favorite one that you competed in? I assume if it's your favorite, you probably won it. But is there a match that stands out?
Yeah. So when I was at Labette, there was a Russian at that time. So I was at Labette Community College, and again, we were a top 5 JUCO. Colby was also one of the top JUCOs in the nation. Actually ended up winning it that year. But Colby had a string of Russians that I don't know how they got the connection. Many of these guys already wrestled internationally at like at the world championships and very high levels. They wanted to go to college, and so they were coming to the U.S. and attending Colby. I was having a great year, and he got injured, was out for 6 weeks, came back off this injury, and wrestled an exhibition match. We were wrestling my old school, Missouri Valley. They had some extra guys. My coach said, hey, you want to jump in and wrestle an exhibition and see, where you're at with your knee? Like, all right, I now wrestled great. 2 nights later, we're wrestling Colby, and our coach always puts he puts the lineup on the door of who's wrestling. So next day after that duel, I walk over and just look at the lineup, and like I'm not even expecting to be back like fully for a couple more weeks. And I look and I'm on the lineup starting, like I'm in the Kobe duel, and I'm going against the Russian. And I'm like knock on coach's door and open it. I said, "Hey," I said, "I'm wrestling tomorrow." And he's like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." He said, "Man, you look great last night. Like you're ready." And I was like, "Oh, okay." I end up having a rivalry with this guy. So he ends up beating me. I think he beats me 3-2, maybe. It was by 1 point, 2-1, 3-2, 4-3, something like that. Beat me right at the end of the match. And I lost that duel. I'm not a crier. And I remember like going to the locker room and crying when I lost that match, not because I got beat, but because I felt like I had let my coach down. That shows you how much my coach impacted me, and I loved him. But I was like, he trusted me so much to put me back in there and I lose this match, And he didn't know I cried. I came back out tough guy, but it mattered to me. Anyway, fast forward, we're at the regional tournament, and I'm just now like almost fully back in shape. My leg had atrophied a little bit being out and all that stuff. I'm just now kind of fully back. He's ranked number 2 in the nation. I think at that time I was ranked 4 or 5 in the nation. And we meet in the regional finals, and I beat him in overtime in the regional finals. That was one of the funnest and coolest matches of my life. It was an absolute war. I have it on video, a little clip, and you just see like the entire gym erupts, like our teams like going nuts, like people leaving the bleachers and running out onto the mat. Wasn't supposed to beat this guy. And so that was a great one. And what's cool is, and he ended up getting me back. The next year, he beat me in the regional finals. And again, we had like a little back and forth battle. We talk on Facebook all the time now. He's a professor in New York, and he's a great guy. And I consider myself a pretty strong human being. I've been working out for a long time. I've rarely ever wrestled someone who I felt like was actually stronger than me, like really, really strong. I've never wrestled anyone as strong as him. And now I think he was like 22 or 23 when I was wrestling him, kind of had that man strength, but those Russians have a different kind of strength. And so he was, so that's the match that stands out for me, man. I love that match.
That's awesome. I can tell you with 100% certainty, I was not expecting the match until you wrestling a Russian. I was figuring in Kansas and Oklahoma, and one of the two, that's pretty logical, but a Russian, that's pretty good. Mm-hmm. Could any of your current or past wrestlers that you've coached beat you one-on-one in wrestling?
Like right now?
And you're in your prime, they're in their prime?
No.
And obviously the weight, I know there's the weight classes, so
yeah.
if a heavyweight or whatever, like, but somebody within a range of your weight class.
Yeah. When I was in my prime, no. So I think I can still get a lot of them now, but there's a few. I'm an old dude now, so there's a few young bucks out there that could probably get me. So, but yeah, in my prime, I don't think so.
Not even the kid that went to Stanford?
No. So now, if I was at his exact weight class, and I know he can't, because even while he was All-American at Stanford, he would come back and train with me, and I could put a whooping on him. So awesome. Now, I was about 15, 20 pounds heavier than him too. So, if we were the exact same weight, he probably got me. But I had some size and strength on him.
Yeah. Last question for you, Coach. I appreciate your time, but this one is probably my favorite question I put on here. Do you have any favorite verses or passages from the Bible? What are some of your favorite verses and passages?
Yeah. Proverbs 14:23 is one of my favorites. We talked about effort earlier, right? But all hard work brings profit, but mere talk leads to poverty. So the Bible literally says, don't just talk about it, be about it, right? All hard work brings profit, mere talk leads to poverty. So Proverbs 14:23, absolutely love that one. Philippians 4:6-8 are great, but like 6 and 7 specifically. It is really, really easy in this life to be anxious and to worry and to stress, those type of things, and it tells us, worry about nothing, but pray about everything. With thankful hearts, offer up your prayers and requests to God. And because you belong to Christ Jesus, you'll be given a peace that goes beyond understanding. That is one that I've memorized and I've spoken to myself many times. And so when I began to get worried or fret or get anxious, and I tell you what, man, during wrestling season, it's really, really easy to do that. It's a high stress sport. You want it for your athletes so bad. And that's not just wrestling. That's every sport, right? And sometimes, just like an athlete can sometimes have the what ifs and start to think about negative outcomes. As a coach, I can get caught in that as well. So then I have to really go back and just rely on giving it to God and thanking God right? And then understanding He's going to give me that peace. So those are a couple that I absolutely love, and I would say, they've impacted me for many years.
Just before I let you go, as a man of faith, as somebody that has a ministry now with the FCA and the leadership council that you do at Washburn, how important do you feel it is that to know scripture like that, to be able to quote some scripture, and just because you've been in it so long, like, is that something that you think is very valuable, so that way when you fall back on hard times you can just automatically rely on what the word says?
Yeah, I think it's important, and I'll put a caveat on that. I think sometimes people, especially if you're new in your faith, and maybe not if you're new in your faith, but especially if you're new in your faith, sometimes people are really scared to talk about their relationship with God or with Jesus and to share that with others, right? They may even feel on their heart sometimes like, I'm supposed to share this with somebody, but they're afraid to do so because they're like, I don't know enough, right? I don't have all these scriptures memorized. I don't know enough. And that's just simply not true, man. It's like, should we be studying scripture? Yes. Do we want that scripture to be written on our heart? Yes. And I tell you what, it's amazing. And start small, like anything else in life, man. If you want to create a good habit, start small. Find a scripture you like and write it down and write it again, right? And just write it several times and say it and memorize and put it someplace where like maybe I could see it here, like on a sticky note or something. Like I always keep sticky notes on my desk, but you could just see it over and over and repeat it or put it in the notes of your phone. So like I have several scriptures. I just pin them in the notes of my phone. In the morning when I wake up, I'll just go through and read those. It's a good way to memorize them. It's a good way to put them in your heart. Sometimes I don't even know I've memorized them yet. And then a situation will come up and then like I'll be able to say them in my head or even share them with somebody. So it is important. Salvation doesn't come through work, right? Salvation literally comes from what Jesus did on the cross. It's done. We just have to accept Him and believe Him, confess with our mouth and believe in our heart that Jesus is Lord. But there's this thing called sanctification. That's a fancy word for growing in your relationship with God. And a good way to do that is through scripture, right? So I definitely think that we want to, just like you'd be disciplined with lifting weights or disciplined in practice, have spiritual practices. One of those is reading the word. And if you can memorize some scripture, that's awesome, especially when times get tough. Now, this is probably a crutch, but we do have it, right? We do have our phones on us the majority of the time. And so, but saying that, I have the Bible app on my phone. I can utilize that. But you could also just look up, man, if you're worrying, like, okay, man, I'm worried right now. Like, what are some scriptures to deal with worry? What are some scriptures to deal with hard times or depression? Or some scriptures about gratitude? I didn't have to be something negative. What are some scriptures about gratitude? What are some scriptures about courage and strength? And you'll be able to just Google those and find many of those. Using AI, it's a great way to be able to do some of that too. So we have a lot of options now, but to be able to recall scripture and especially in situations or to share with somebody, I think is a great thing. But I just want to reiterate that if you're new to the faith and don't feel like you have to be there yet, it is a process and it's a journey. And I know people, man, we had this young man at Washburn 2 years ago on the Influence Council and made him president of our FCA there. I have never met, he's a savant. I've never met anyone that knows so many scriptures and he studies them. But you could say the most random scripture. You could just be like, all right, man, I want you to let's see, Ecclesiastes 1:3. And he'd be like, and he would just spout it off. Or you could say the scripture and he'd be like, oh yeah, that's from 2 Peter, and I'd be like, how do you do that? Like it was unreal, So, but it is good to be able to find some scriptures that you like and love and memorize them.
Well, you can get a good book, Game Changing Moves, on Amazon. Coach P was the writer of that. He does have a podcast that is currently on hiatus, Perspective Podcast with Coach P. I'm sure you can find it on all the various podcast platforms. And if you're around Washburn University football or Shawnee Heights wrestling, be on the lookout for Coach P. So thank you for coming on tonight.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And then, social media, I just keep everything easy. It's Coach Chad Parks. So Instagram, TikTok, Coach Chad Parks. Keep it very easy. If anybody want to reach out by email, coachchadparks@gmail.com. Website, Coach Chad Parks. So has all the podcasts on it. So
I love it. I love it. Well, thanks for putting that out there. And again, thanks for coming on.
Yes, sir. Hey, it has been a blessing and an honor. Thank you.